Hello folks. Alright, I want to talk about the project for 485 in the video today. This does kind of assume that you've already watched the intro for the labs, since that goes through a lot of the language that we're going to be targeting, the source code language that we're going to be using. So if you haven't watched that one yet, watch that one first and then come back. Okay, assuming you're back. The idea for the 485 project is that we're going to be writing a custom compiler in C++, sort of by hand, to take programs written in Wonderful and translate them into a target language. Now, I'm going to formalize the details for the project basically over the course of January, but I did want to give you a chance to have a kind of a look forward at where we're going to be going with it. So we won't get much into the meat of this for the first few weeks, but you can get an idea of where this is going to wind up going. So the target language that we're going to be coming up with is essentially a small subset of Bash. So the idea is I want you to have to translate the wonderful structures and constructs into a language that uses a very different syntax. So the pieces of Bash that we're going to be using are while loops, if statements without the else's and else ifs, the basic numeric comparison operators, the echo statement, the use of variables and the $sign, and then integer literals and string literals, comments, the assignment operator, and functions and returns. So that's pretty much the only parts of Bash that you're allowed to use when you're translating wonderful programs into our new language. So it's only a tiny subset of Bash, and it does mean that you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, if I'm translating a repeat until from wonderful into a while loop in Bash, I've got to figure out, okay, well, a repeat until is always going to execute at least once, so I've got to make sure it executes at least once and then kind of does the test and figures out what it's going to do with the while. So there are going to be a couple of sort of subtleties that you have to deal with. And of course, the dealing with different kinds of operators and different syntax and whatnot. Again, this is somewhat in flux, and we'll be finalizing the details over the course of January. So what you're going to be doing is, of course, forking and cloning a project repository where I give you a bunch of sort of starting points, and I'm going to get you to make sure that you go through, provide some of the core pieces that would be, standard for a high quality coding project. So you've got to provide a good makefile, you've got to have a good structure to your repository, so I'm going to require you to have it divided up into a bunch of specific subdirectories with different things in those subdirectories. So a bin directory for the executables, a source directory for the CPPs, a header directory for the .h files, etc. I'm going to expect you to have a test directory that's got all of the test cases that you've tested the program on. And I'm going to have you break that down into valid wonderful test cases and invalid ones, so the ones that have bugs in and the ones that are supposed to be error-free, readmes, etc., etc. So I'm going to expect you to provide a reasonably high-quality solution. I'm not going to provide you with code standards, but you do have to give quality code. So if you've got go-tos all over the place and you've got a lousy indentation and no comments and that kind of thing, you are going to wind up losing marks. Right? By this point, you know what good code looks like. So I am going to expect you to follow reasonable coding standards. All right, and we'll get into some of the details about how your compiler is supposed to behave. Essentially, your compiler will be reading source code from standard input, writing the translated version to standard output, and if there's error messages or warnings that the compiler needs to spit out, it'll send those to standard error. So we will get into this in a lot more detail as the term goes on, but this gives you an idea up front as to what you can expect in a few weeks. All right, I think that was everything I wanted to cover on the project part.